Nobody wants to arrive at the conclusion that is almost inescapable right now, which is that Trump enjoys autocracy. He enjoys autocracy. He enjoys power. He wants to seize more. He has said that America would welcome a dictator. At what point do we say, this isn't fascism? Oh, no, this is fine. Maybe we should ask our listeners, what is it then? You know, if it isn't dictatorship, if it isn't autocracy, if it isn't fascist, what is it then? What is the name for this if it's not that?
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And Lisa Cook may not be a name that is very familiar to you, but it's going to become more familiar because she is on the board of the Federal Reserve, an independent body that sets monetary policy for the US. Last week, at the end of last week, Donald Trump took it upon himself to fire her for grounds that are, well, let's say dubious at the least, and also raised questions over, does Donald Trump have the right to sack who is on the board of the Federal Reserve? She's the only black woman, the first black woman to be appointed to it. But Donald Trump says there are questions over something she did about mortgages and therefore she's not fit to be serving. There has been nothing proven against her whatsoever. And it looks like a naked power grab by Donald Trump to get rid of someone who'd been appointed by Joe Biden for a 14-year term, to put someone in who will do his bidding so that Donald Trump will set the interest rates for the United States of America, not a bunch of independent-minded officials, technocrats who've got America's best interests at heart.
Yeah, as you say, she's one of 7 governors who sits on the Federal Reserve Board. She was nominated by the Biden administration in 2022 and approved, confirmed by the Senate. And I guess the question is how she entered Trump's orbit. And this is where things get sublimely crazy as ever. It was a perfectly random tweet by somebody presumably desperate to placate Trump. His name is Bill Pult. He's Director of Federal Housing under Donald Trump, and he suddenly takes to social media and he posts that he's found evidence that Lisa Cook has committed mortgage fraud, questions of the kind that we're pretty familiar with here, you know, whether you paid tax on your first property, your primary residence, or your second. And he says that she got a more favorable rate from the bank. These are just his posts. There's been no evidence. There's been no investigation. There's been no charge against Lisa Cook. And what's kind of delightful in the middle of all this is that Lisa Cook just says, no, I'm not going. I'm not going anywhere. Trump has no right to fire me. And to be fair, the Federal Reserve Board is pretty well protected. They cannot just be fired by the president. And she said, I'm not going anywhere. I'll get lawyers in. I'll sue if needs be. And so far, the Fed have stayed behind her and said, yeah, she's still on. And I guess you have to put this in the context of the months of wrangling that Trump has been having with the Fed up till this point. All this noise about whether he's going to fire the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell. He wants Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. Jerome Powell is independent. He's an economist. He's saying, no, I'll do it when it's ready, when the economy demands. I won't do it on the say-so of a man who wants to be an autocrat. And so I guess in the last, 10 days, Trump has backed off firing the older white guy. He doesn't want to upset the markets. And he's fired the deputy, the board member, the black woman instead. And yes, you know, she's the first black woman on the Fed board, which might just be one big, huge coincidence, or it might not. And so there you have this massive overreach where Trump is basically trying to control something that cannot be controlled, which is the state of the economy. Jerome Powell has been pretty outspoken. I mean, they have this big sort of central bankers meeting in Wyoming, in Jackson Hole. It's a big meeting where everyone comes together and they kind of talk about the state of the economy, the state of the world, the direction of travel. And it was just kind of around this time when all eyes of the world are on the central bankers that she suddenly finds that she's been fired. Jerome Powell had been very candid. He's one of the few people that stood up to Trump there is a moment where Trump is being shown round the renovations of the Federal Reserve, and he starts telling Jerome Powell that he's overspent, that the budget's overspent. And Jerome Powell goes, "No, you're wrong. We haven't overspent. I think you're getting confused with a previous renovation, another building that happened 5 years ago." He stands up to Trump and essentially says he's wrong. And he's also been pretty clear about what he thinks Trump is doing to the economy. He's said it, in very kind of neutral economic language. He's talked about the tariffs making things much harder for American businesses and American consumers. He's talked about the tightening of the labor market. In other words, it's pretty hard to get people to work now because ICE has sort of fired and deported so many people. There aren't enough people in the labor market. And so he's kind of been pretty frank about where he thinks the economy is going. And as a result, Trump has kind of taken again him, can't fire him because he doesn't want to upset the markets. And so he goes, as ever, for the woman instead. At the moment, we're kind of looking at the bond markets, and they are sort of muted but wary. They're not reacting because she hasn't actually gone, but they're kind of saying, I'm not massively sure this is the trajectory we want to be on right now.
But this is part of a piece, isn't it? Because we saw the head of the Bureau of Labour Statistics being fired a couple of weeks ago. What was her crime? She published the labour statistics. Pure and simple. That was it. She had produced the numbers that the labour statisticians had come up with, which showed that there was a slowing in the labour market in the United States of America. That was an uncomfortable truth for Donald Trump. It gave him bad headlines. So he said it was fake news. It was a Biden appointee. She has to go as well. And so what you are doing, and this is the gamble that Donald Trump is taking, the establishment of the Federal Reserve as this truly independent body was always at the outset viewed with suspicion. Which politician was going to give up control over the levers of the macroeconomic policy for a country? No one was. We can't believe that it would be truly independent. And it's been hard-earned and hard-won that the setting of interest rates in the United States is not being done for short-term political manipulation. It's being done for the long-term good of macroeconomic stability for the US. And in Britain, we've had something very similar in 1997 after Blair wins the election. Gordon Brown announces the operational independence of the Bank of England, where they are set targets for inflation and growth, but they are not told when to raise interest rates and when to cut them. Donald Trump clearly wants to scrap all of that. And that has profound consequences for the global economy if you think that the numbers you are seeing coming out of the world's biggest economy, the United States of America, are bullshit. And that is the danger of what Donald Trump is doing now. And that is why everyone, as you say, Emily, is watching the bond markets to see what he might do next, what the consequences will be.
But there is a pattern, isn't there? As you say, when he doesn't like the economic numbers, he fires the woman at the Bureau of Labour Statistics. When he doesn't like what's happening to interest rates, he fires the woman again at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. And when he doesn't like somebody in political life, he goes after them. This is the week in which he suddenly sent FBI agents round to John Bolton's house. You will know John Bolton, the sort of mustachioed former NSA director who is now a very vocal critic of Trump and who has ironically accused Trump of retribution politics. Now, Trump comes out...
Emily, I've got to stop you there. Donald Trump said he didn't know anything at all about the FBI action against John Bolton. Saw it on TV
at the same time as you did. That's the one, isn't it? Saw it on television at the same time as you did. So it's not Trump. It's not Kash Patel. It's just the independent working of the FBI agents who suddenly turn up at his Maryland home and start going through his papers. And the one thing Trump says is, oh, yeah, well, I know how that feels because it happened to me at Mar-a-Lago. So no retribution going on here at all. And I think the pick of John Bolton is quite a clever one because he's a man who, we've had him on the news agents before. He's quite irascible, but he's quite outspoken. And he's slightly, I guess, politically friendless. He hasn't pleased the MAGA crowd because he's been a vocal critic of Trump. He hasn't pleased the Democrats because he is a neocon and he's always been staunchly against the Democrats, even at his most vocal criticism of Trump. And he hasn't really got a home, even with the sort of old school Republicans now who, I don't know, I mean, have kind of lost their voice and don't really see him as one of their own either. And so I think in going after Bolton, Trump has found somebody that nobody is vocally defending enough. And actually, at this point, we should just say, you do not have to like somebody's politics. You do not have to like what they stand for as a politician or as a political voice to say it is wrong to take your retribution out on people who criticize you. And it is very clear that is what Trump is doing right now. He's doing it with John Bolton. He's doing it with the Fed. He's even threatening to do it with Chris Christie, former New Jersey governor, another one who stood against Trump this time round in 2024 and was very outspoken in his criticism. Trump is basically just ticking them off, trying to put heads on sticks and parade them around the town.
Well, look, it seems that he has control, or he's getting control, of the Fed. We've talked about what's happening at the Bureau of Labour Statistics. He has absolute and total control over the Justice Department, where there always used to be the idea that the Attorney General was somehow separate from the President of the United States. Donald Trump is now going around and saying, I am the man who is in charge and responsible for law and order in this country. Well, then he is responsible for the knock on the door at John Bolton's home, where the FBI swoop in and take away bags and bags of stuff belonging to Mr. Bolton as part of an inquiry. John Bolton was appointed the National Security Advisor by Donald Trump in his first term. He was a Trump appointee, and for a while he was very highly regarded. But John Bolton's always been where he's been, which is he is a hawk. He is a neocon. He is one of those people who has sort of aggressively believed that America should be a leader of policing the world. And as a consequence, those are the views he's espoused for successive Republican presidents. He has been a public servant of the United States for kind of nearly 50 years. The other thing that Donald Trump did, and if you think that we're overdoing this kind of line of the politics of vengeance, there is a credible threat against John Bolton from the Iranians, who John Bolton has advocated that America should attack and depose, the people in charge in Tehran. There is a credible terrorist threat against John Bolton from the Iranian security people. Donald Trump stripped Bolton of his security detail so that Bolton has no security whatsoever now. And Donald Trump has followed that up via the Attorney General to say, right, we're going to raid his home and see if he had documents that he shouldn't have had. I mean, he had nothing compared to what Donald Trump had squirreled away at Mar-a-Lago that was going to lead to a credible case against him, but for the intervention of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's always a story that takes you for a moment or two down a rabbit hole. So in John Bolton's case, it's about the book that he published, the memoir he published, and whether he used information that was classified. John Bolton got his book signed off before it was published. That is just what you have to do before you release a book if you've been at the head of the National Security Agency. And yet they have confected this argument that he's in possession of classified materials. Who else was accused of being in possession of classified materials? I mean, that's where it gets sort of silly. He couldn't, in this revenge politics, he couldn't even change the excuse. And it's the same thing that we do when it's Lisa Cook and we start going down this rabbit hole of, oh, well, was her mortgage wrong? Oh, well, did she, not pay the tax on her primary residence? It's actually the same thing in a way. You were talking about the Maureen Dowd piece last week about crime on the streets of Washington. It's the same thing. It takes everyone down this rabbit hole. Yes, of course, there's crime in Washington. There is crime in many blue state cities of America. There's crime in many red state cities of America. But instead of actually saying what is at stake here is a power grab, it's a move to put soldiers, troops on the streets. It's not a move to solve crime. we start going down this kind of very whimsical, oh, well, we should just investigate and see whether there's a bit of truth in this. It's very tiring to keep doing that because actually there is always something that he wants to land as a grain of truth. And most of the time, it's a diversion. It's a diversion so that the liberal media or the progressives or the people who call themselves good journalists and have to do a bit of on the one hand, on the other hand, investigate everything properly. Nobody wants to arrive at the conclusion that is almost inescapable right now, which is that Trump enjoys autocracy. He enjoys autocracy. He enjoys power. He wants to seize more. And he will find whatever excuses he can to do it. I mean, we talk about John Bolton because he's a high-profile figure, but it's not the first time. You know, we've seen what's happened to Miles Taylor, who wrote an op-ed that he objected to in his first term. We've seen what happened to Chris Krebs, who pronounced that Biden's election win was fair. Those two both got chased. Those two are both being investigated. It's happening all over the Justice Department. It's happening to lawyers who were actually the prosecutors of the January the 6th rioters. It's happening to lots of people a lot of the time. He's going after his enemies list. We know he has an enemies list because he told Kash Patel, and Kash Patel put it in his book. This is what is being enacted now. If Trump doesn't like you because you've stood against him in any shape or form, he is now going after you.
So let's go back to kind of how we started this episode, where you raised the question, whatever happened to checks and balances in the United States? Because, you know, the US Constitution was very carefully drawn up by the founding fathers that there should be these three co-equal branches of government which keep each other in check so that nobody becomes overmighty. And, you know, you go back to one of the most fundamental ideas of the United States of America and why there is a Second Amendment, dare I say it, which is, you know, the right to bear arms, is that states should have the power to resist an overmighty federal government. And yet what are we seeing now as part of this sort of trend where Donald Trump either wants to take over institutions or run them or intimidate those who are part of them? What we're seeing in Washington, D.C., with the National Guard coming in to take control, and what we possibly are about to see in Chicago, where Donald Trump is saying, I don't care whether the people want me to send the National Guard into Chicago. I don't care whether the city elected officials don't want it. I don't care what the governor thinks. I am going to do it anyway. And it has brought this kind of, you know, pretty strong response. And J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois, where Chicago is, has spoken out about what Donald Trump is proposing.
J.B. Pritzker is showing a little bit of muscle, I might even say machismo there. He joins Gavin Newsom, who we talked about last week, the governor of California. He possibly also joins Wes Brown, the governor of Maryland. These are three of the Democrats' potential hopes for the 2028 election, the presidential election. And each in their own way have decided that they've just had enough of taking this line down. They're kicking back. Newsom is doing it with parody on Twitter. He's trolling Trump. He's using his block capitals. Wes Brown is inviting Trump to join him on the streets. Walk the streets of Baltimore with me if you want. I'll show you what goes on in the city, implying that Trump doesn't know. And Pritzker is doing the same thing. I mean, the jab about Trump's mental faculties is meant to make him go, ouch. It is a way of saying we've had enough. We're not going to take this line down. And I think the fight back, is sort of starting there. I mean, it's definitely not starting with Republican lawmakers who don't seem to care what's going on. It definitely isn't really happening in the House of Representatives, in Congress in general. And maybe it is now the governors who are going to take this fight properly to Trump, because as you say, there is a sense of protecting your state. And that is a very, very strong sense of what America is about. You know, your statehood first.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the Republicans who aren't going to take the fight to Donald Trump. You know, going back into history, Abraham Lincoln, a Republican president, assembled after the Civil War this cabinet around him, which was known as the team of rivals. They'd all opposed Abraham Lincoln, but for the sake of national unity, he wanted to bring together rival strands. Let no one say that Donald Trump has done that with the cabinet that he has assembled around him.
It is also pretty damn scary, actually. I mean, Timothy Schneider, who wrote the whole book about autocracy, is, his first chapter is Do Not Obey. And actually, what we are hearing is person after person, sycophant after sycophant around Trump, who are just acquiescing to whatever he wants. And I think it leads us to a really big question. And it's really difficult not to sound like you're sort of hitting the nuclear button when you talk like this. But he has said that America would welcome a dictator. He said he didn't want to be a dictator, but he thinks America would welcome a dictator if he cleared up crime. He likes to take control of institutions. He likes to go after his enemies. He likes to send the FBI and the Justice Department in to arrest people. He likes to deport people with people wearing masks on their faces. At what point do we say, this isn't fascism? Oh, no, this is fine. This is okay. Don't be dramatic. Don't be silly. Don't reach for that stupid word the whole time. But I just don't know what it is. I mean, maybe we should ask our listeners, what is it then? If it isn't dictatorship, if it isn't autocracy, if it isn't fascist, to go after your enemies, to arrest people without due process, to surround yourself with people who will never criticize and only flatter, to take control of institutions that have always been independent and always flourished as independent institutions. What is it then? What is the name for this if it's not that?
Well, next year we have the midterm elections next November, and if the Democrats take control of a tightly balanced House, then of course things look very different for Donald Trump, because the inquiries that will be set up will be very, very unfavourable to him and focus much more on his behaviour. So we've seen what's been happening in Texas with the attempt to redistrict, to create an extra 5 Republican seats. We were talking a moment ago about the National Guard going into Illinois. We've talked about the National Guard being deployed to Washington. If you've got the National Guard on the streets next November, what happens to turnout in strong Republican areas when you know that Donald Trump's police are on the streets at his behest, answering to him? Will that increase turnout, or will it suppress turnout in Democrat areas? If you're cynical, you would absolutely alight on the question, Emily, that you have just raised. This isn't about cancelling elections, but there again, the really good political leaders never need to cancel elections. They carry on just on an uneven playing field. And in a moment, we'll be hearing from one of the key figures around Zohran Mamdani as he runs to be New York mayor in November. Well, I'm joined now by Patrick Gaspard, who is an informal advisor to Zohran Mamdani. In 2008, he was Obama's national political director and later served as ambassador to South Africa. And I see you described in the New York Times as Mamdani's emissary to New York power players.
I know you don't believe everything you read in the New York Times now.
Okay, is that true? Is that a good description of what you're doing?
I think it's fair to say that Zohran Mamdani is a friend of mine. I have been informally providing counsel to him through his historic win in the primary contest, and that's continued now. There are many New Yorkers, many national political figures in politics, in business, in cultural spaces that I have the privilege to have gotten to know over the many years that I've been engaged. And it's been a thrill to be able to share some of those relationships and some of those orientations and perspectives with Assemblyman Mamdani. It's been great and it's been fun.
Patrick, the impression that has been given by what I've read in the media is that those power brokers in New York, I could put this crudely, I don't know what the phrase is, crapping themselves about the possibility of Zohran Mamdani as mayor of New York.
Is that a scientific term?
I think I could have gone for themselves, but I went for the slightly more polite version of it. But seriously, I mean, some of the proposals that he's come up with have absolutely horrified the power brokers of New York. And I just wonder, when you're trying to introduce him and talk to people about him, how that's going.
Well, first, your premise is correct. Many people have been crapping themselves, not just business leaders, but a lot of traditional political actors have been crapping themselves as well. I would posit to you that it's not about any of his individual proposals. It's about where he sits in the zeitgeist. We are in not a left versus right moment in America, and I would argue with you in the UK and much of the world, but rather an outsider versus insider moment. I think that's the more important dynamic to really understand about our political ecosystem these days. Zohran Mamdani very, very much sits in the outsider spectrum, let's say, as somebody who's kind of like storming the political Bastille. And it's not one individual idea, but this notion that the system is rigged against you. You are not benefiting from these institutions, and those, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, who are standing in front of these institutions and guarding them with their dear lives, are actually standing in the way of your progress and the social mobility of your children and an opportunity into the future, because the game is rigged against you. I'd point out, if I could, the horrific murder in Midtown Manhattan last year of the health insurance executive, and we saw a response to that murder. That was, again, not a left or a right response, but an outsider versus insider. A lot of people who are angry, who are feeling as if they have no chance to absolutely make it at all in healthcare, in public education, in housing. Zohran Mamdani arrives in the midst of that zeitgeist. He says the system is indeed rigged against you. Here are a number of things that I believe can help to solve for that, particularly in the space of the cost of living. But it's not any individual proposal, but this sense that this is somebody who's completely upsetting the traditional apple cart.
Patrick, I just don't want to misunderstand what you've just said there. So you talk about the murder of the CEO of the health company in cold blood and premeditated, apparently.
Horrific act. But you're saying that was the result of people feeling on the outside and hopeless? No. I'm not saying that the murder was. I'm saying that the response to the murder was this dynamic that's really different in our societies now. I think it's a post-pandemic reaction. Some years ago when we were running Barack Obama for president in the U.S., we were in the wake of the Great Recession, of course, that had a long tail, difficult recovery in all of our nations. But there was a sense that somehow we were working with one another towards better ends for all. On the tail end of that, folks were feeling really dislocated. A lot of people lost their housing. There was this sense that those who were extraordinarily well off ended up doing better. Bankers weren't punished, et cetera. That created something of a divide. And then you arrive at the pandemic. COVID, again, more displacement. And COVID was not the Great Recession, it was the Great Reveal, where you had people who were solidly middle class, who suddenly were feeling profoundly insecure. And it was clear that the rug had been pulled out from under them. And folks were in a kind of spiritual malaise and not altogether hopeful about our institutions and the ability of traditional politicians to kind of rescue us. So this election that just happened in New York, elections that are happening all around the world, are now in that post-pandemic prism. We have to see them through that. When we talk about the middle class, we're not talking about a space of aspiration, but a space of insecurity. Zohran Mamdani arrives in that. He says, this is not working. Here are some things I think we could be doing better. And there's a response. Of course, he's a democratic socialist. That has connotations. There's also the reality of Israel and Gaza playing out in the backdrop of this. And I would argue to you that Zohran Mamdani does not get to part the curtain and make a credible case if he's not seen as credible on something that is seizing the public political imaginations, particularly of younger voters in the U.S. and elsewhere. He's seen as credible on that. It gives him a point of entry into the other conversations about affordability, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we were talking about, Britain to stand on a ticket and saying you're a democratic socialist, I mean, broadly speaking, that is the Labour Party. It's a party of democratic socialists. In US politics, the centre of political gravity is further to the right. Nobody stands as a democratic socialist. Well, I mean, Bernie Sanders a bit.
Sanders?
Yeah, but he stood as an independent in Vermont. It's not this, you've got, I'm talking about Zohran Mamdani as someone who is going to be emblematic of the direction of travel of the Democratic Party. Do you think America is ready for a democratic socialist leader?
I'd say a couple of things. We have to start with you and I have the understanding that London is not the UK, New York is not the United States of America. There are things that are unique about these global capitals, extraordinarily different with multicultural, cosmopolitan populations, people coming in and out, et cetera, et cetera. So, but there are compositional changes to the electorate. There are economic changes in the country. There are cultural and technological changes that kind of reduce the emphasis again on right versus left and on labels like even democratic socialist. And people want to know, are you on my side? Are you fighting for my family? And that's why I believe in communities where Donald Trump did really well, even though New York is not America, Donald Trump did have an 18-point improvement in his performance in New York in 2024 versus 2020 or 2016, because people want pugilists in this moment. They want people who are telling them and making it very clear that the institutions have not been on your side, and we're going to shake them up and dislodge that power to make it work for you. And Zohran represented all of that.
Do you think Zohran Mamdani can win over Wall Street, or is it important that he doesn't?
Look, I worked for, a candidate in 2008 who was a state senator in Chicago, Illinois, a black man with, a foreign, let's just say a foreign sounding name. And the argument was that not only could he not win a Democratic primary in places like Iowa, for instance, but he couldn't win the nomination. And then if he secured it, that the business community would stand staunchly against him. I think that over time, that candidate, Barack Obama, demonstrated that with the advent of technology that enables one to go around traditional media and directly to the electorate, there's a new kind of power that's accrued at the grassroots, and that's catalytic and that can be mobilized in ways that can create a durability in governance. And from that kind of power, business leaders understood that this was somebody who was going to stick around for a moment and represented a new trend. And there were lots of partnerships that were formed across ideological and philosophical divides. Zohran right now is having meaningful conversations with business leaders who don't just care about their tax bracket, but who care about public transportation, public safety, public education, who understand that their ability to do well as business leaders in New York is dependent on their ability of their workers to maintain their homes and their communities, and so they know they've got to meet Zohran at least halfway on some of them. So he doesn't have to win over the Wall Street vote, but should he be successful in November, he needs to govern in a way that is going to consider the terribly important role that major business plays in the lifeblood of a city like New York and a country like America.
You very elegantly drew a kind of comparison of how Barack Obama was seen when he was, in Springfield, Illinois, and kind of trying to make his way on the national stage, and Zohran Mamdani now. What does Barack Obama think of Zohran Mamdani?
Well, first, I'm going to thank you for describing anything that I do as elegant. That is the highest aspiration. First, let me just say a thing about Zohran that is something that that struck me about Barack Obama when I first met him. I first met him in 2003. He was still a state senator in Illinois, had not yet been elected to the U.S. Senate seat. But I recognized within 15 minutes of meeting him that this was somebody who was an incredible political athlete, adroit enough to take complicated issues and make them accessible for average folk in a way that spoke to our broad aspirations. I recognized the same things in Zohran. Zohran is an incredible political athlete, phenomenal communicator. He knows how to use the tools of the moment, but he also knows how to extend a broad grace and an empathy to even folks who may disagree with him on one issue or another. And like Obama, he's a happy warrior. Even when he's in a fight, you feel a sense of a kind of jubilation about being able to be part of the community and the conversation. So, I'm not going to report out on private conversations. I will say to you that it will not surprise you that former President Obama recognizes the skill set that Zohran Mamdani had, recognizes the historic nature of the candidacy, somebody who's going to be the first, if he's successful, Muslim American mayor in New York, and also recognizes the pitfalls that are ahead if one isn't constantly reaching out. Zohran has made it public that the president has encouraged him to broaden his coalition, broaden his base, and to be incredibly thoughtful about what it means to build a government that constitutes the very best that is available in talent.
So I wouldn't be misrepresenting you or what you just said to me to say, so far, Barack Obama likes what he sees.
I think that again, I refuse even on your dynamic podcast to get out over my skis and make any representations for my former boss. But it's clear that he would not have picked up the phone and reached out to Zohran if he had not been impressed with how Zohran is conducting himself and the movement that he's leading.
So that is so fascinating because the rest of the Democratic Party, in terms of, whether it be Chuck Schumer, whether it be Hakeem Jeffries, they're treating him like he's radioactive.
Look, I would. This is when I was laying out all the reasons why I thought that Zohran was successful. There are more things I want to say about that, but I did also note the tension inside the Democratic Party about the conduct of Israel and Gaza and its ramifications for the Palestinian people and all the impact that that's had on American politics. It's roiled American politics, roiled the waters here. I think that there are many Democrats who are still waking up to the reality of the onslaught in Gaza and what it's meant for them to have extended a kind of unconditional support to Benjamin Netanyahu and created a permission structure that has led to most of the decimation that's taken place in the last many months. And there's a huge generational divide inside many communities in the U.S. On this issue, and all of that was on display in Zohran's contest. Going into this, many traditional Democrats would have argued with you that somebody with Zohran Mamdani's position could not be successful in New York, which has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. And Zohran, with his moral clarity on this issue, has demonstrated that even many in the Jewish community support his perspective on it. I would suggest to you that Zohran's outsider status, the association with the Democratic Socialists of America, and the reality of the political divide on Israel, Gaza, inside the Democratic Party has played a role in all of that has played a role in hesitation for traditional Democrats to come on board in a fulsome way. But I think that even with that, many are already taking lessons from his victory. And I see many who are running around America now, and some in New York, many around the country, who are mirroring many of the things that Zohran did with his relentless communication, doing everything everywhere all at once, not fearing to just go anywhere and to have difficult conversations, his ability to take and distill his message into very, very simple points. Everybody knew exactly where Zohran Mamdani stood on rent, on public transportation and free buses, on higher taxes for billionaires. There was clarity in it. I think that his relentless focus on cost of living is being replicated and copied by other Democrats now, and the kind of outside the system, we're going to shake this up message of his has been a contagion in the party, even with those who continue to not embrace him or denounce him. I also think that over the next couple of weeks, you'll see a shift in many traditional Democrats putting their arms around Zohran, standing with him behind podiums and saying, this is part of the future of the party.
So you think that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer need to get on board?
I think that Zohran's victory is an instructive one. I think that there's a new energy in the party. When you're able to attract more than 40,000 volunteers in this cynical era to come out and give the best of themselves and go door to door in communities, you're doing something right. And I think that most Democrats should understand that this guy has hit the sweet spot on the overwhelming issue that most voters care about, and that he's inspired young people to participate, who we thought could never get off of their phones. And I think that they, should lean into that and should be associated with that and take the best of that. You don't have to agree, and it's never been the case in the UK or in the US that political leaders make endorsements based on 100% alignment with other candidates. It's never been the case, and I have a sneaking suspicion it won't continue to be the case in this race much longer, and that folks are going to come on board.
Do you see it as a source of concern or celebration that Donald Trump is demonizing him to such an extent? That's a
badge of honor for Zohran Mamdani when you have a president who is running roughshod over our Constitution, who's turning our values on its ear, somebody who compels like all of the leadership in Europe to have to fly at a moment's notice into Washington, D.C. to stand as bulwarks with President Zelensky because they're terrified that the U.S. president is going to sell them out, sell all of us out to the Russian dictator. When you have somebody who's snatching people off the streets of the U.S. without any due process and sending them off to gulags in El Salvador, somebody who's trying to bring major research institutions and universities to heel because they won't follow his ridiculous political dictates. When you have that kind of a figure in office who also happens to be profoundly corrupt, nakedly corrupt, it is a badge of honor to have that as your opposition. And it should be a point of disgrace that some of Zohran's opponents are making direct appeals to Donald Trump for his support. This is an existential moment.
What do you mean by that? Sorry, what do you mean by that? Who?
You may have seen the coverage in the New York Times that the former governor of New York and his associates have been in direct conversation with Donald Trump to try to help them to narrow the field in New York and to help them make the case against Zohran. So if that's where they want to make their bed, they're going to find that there are iron spikes in that bed.
Andrew Cuomo, who you're talking about, who was the governor of New York State, who was trounced by Mamdani in the primaries. Are you worried about him running as an independent and the threat that he poses?
I think that when you're Zohran Mamdani and you are an outsider and you're 33 years old, self-identified Democratic socialist, and you're trying to do something that's never been done before, you have to take nothing for granted and you have to run all the way through the tape and try to bring as many folks along as you possibly can. So if you're trying to do something like this, you should always be anxious about your chances and do all that you can to kind of consolidate, strengthen your coalition, and keep running hard.
Patrick Gaspard, grateful to you. Fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Great to be on. Thank you so much.
So if you've driven up and down the freeways of the United States of America, you will have seen the Cracker Barrel restaurant chains everywhere. And Cracker Barrel is a sort of imagined old version of America. Folksy, old school. It drips nostalgia for an America of bygone days. And Cracker Barrel were finding that their numbers, their sales were going down. And so they reimagined what Cracker Barrel would mean and tried to make it modern. Except, of course, in Trump's America, if you make something modern, it must be woke.
All they did was change their logo. They had a logo that featured what they call an old timer, like an old guy, sort of, I don't know, in a rocking chair or something. Anyway, an old guy who was an old timer. They updated the logo. They got rid of the old timer, the old guy, and they just made it a clean barrel with their name on it. And Trump hated it. And sure enough, when Trump hates something in the commercial world seems to do what he wants, whether it's Coca-Cola taking out the sugar and replacing it with sugar cane, or whether it's Intel just seeing itself being taken a stake of by Trump because he's reached out there. What we are seeing is Trump unable to keep his hands off anything, even a chain of restaurants. So sure enough, what's happened? Cracker Barrel has cracked. They've gone back to their old logo.
And the funny thing is that this is the home of capitalism. And a company says that people don't want nostalgia America. They want something more modern. All their market research says no one's coming into our restaurant. We're losing money because of it. But because Donald Trump wants to create nostalgia America, he says it's got to happen like that. It's all nuts.
But they've made a lot of money off the publicity, as ever. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents USA.